This is a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online, the online resource for all construction professionals that's available 24/7. Please don't forget to subscribe at the place you usually get your podcasts so as not to miss a thing, as well as visiting our YouTube channel. Hello again and welcome to another podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. As usual, Barney, my red Labrador, is here to offer his advice and to keep an eye on things. And by the way, Barney and I would really appreciate it if you would like to write a review. If you're new to Duncan Cartlidge Online podcasts, welcome. Please don't forget to subscribe, as well as catching up with previous episodes. If you're already a subscriber, a really big thank you for your support. Please spread the word. In this absolutely jam-packed episode, we'll be discussing Comp 7th edition, A Victory for Common Sense, circular construction, is it really feasible? Is alliancing the answer, or is it just partnering in disguise? And goodbye Big Ange, hello Steve. So, let's start off with Comp 7th edition, A Victory for Common Sense. Now, many of you will be aware of the backlash when NRM2 was published. The new rules, it was thought, had been introduced largely without consultation, thereby alienating many overnight. Well, the RICS took the same high-handed approach with another measurement standard, the Code of Measurement Practice, or COMP. That's the standard for calculating the gross internal floor area used widely throughout the industry. Back in 2015, the RICS thought it would be a good idea to join the International Property Measurement Standards Coalition, or IPMS. After all, there were a good few air miles to be earned visiting other members' countries. The RICS had decided that the Code of Measurement Practice, which has been used in the industry for years, was now past its sell-by date, and IPMS was the future. The reason given was that IPMS set a universal standard for calculating floor areas. In the coming years, IPMS issued several very complicated measurement standards, with each category of building, industrial, office, residential and retail, having its own discrete set of rules to replace COMP, including the introduction of the Internal Dominant Face, or IDF. IDF is defined as the inside finished surface comprising more than 50% of floor-to-ceiling height for each IDF wall section. If there is no internal dominant face, because no face in an IDF wall section exceeds 50%, or if the internal dominant face is not vertical, the measurement should be to the finished surface. Now there is more, but as you can see, it's not exactly straightforward. However, pleased with their new toy, the RICS archived COMP, while the new rules of measurement, the IPMS rules, were made mandatory, all without consulting RICS members. And let's get this right, RICS mandatory statements mean adopt or end up on the naughty step. As one anonymous member remarked at the time, to my knowledge, surveyors are continuing to follow the latest RICS Code of Measurement Practice, that's COMP, and totally ignoring the international measurement standards, which is regarded as a distraction and not relevant. Subsequently, COMP was unarchived, and then in 2023, the IPMS coalition, without any explanation, bins the concept of separate measurement rules in favour of one set of rules for all buildings. But you know, I'm not sure that anybody actually noticed. But it now appears that the RICS membership has won, and in 2026 we'll see a new 7th edition of Comp, which will be very similar to the 6th edition, although there is still a debate on which parts, if any, of the new edition should be mandatory. IPMS all buildings remain for those who wish to use it. What a joke of an institution, and of course, Mothman is still fluttering around, which reminds me, I saw this week in the national newspaper that the property that caused Mothman's, aka the RICS president, Justin Sullivan, to step sideways, is back on the market. Hopefully it's myths-free now. And now moving on to circular construction. Is it really feasible? Quite justifiably, the construction industry is concerned about the extent of its carbon emissions. Every few months, the technical press seems to contain an article promoting one of the solutions to reduce the carbon footprint is moving to the so-called circular construction. But is it really feasible? Construction projects are very often cost and time prioritised, which can lead to working habits being wasteful and irrational for those tasked with producing the building. It is undeniable that construction is very wasteful. According to several sources, the sector uses between 400 and 450 million tonnes of materials every year, which results in 60 million tonnes of waste being produced and accounts, together with running costs, for 40% of all the UK's CO2 emissions. In addition, 30% of all road freight in the UK is, you've guessed it, building materials. To put this in context, this level of waste in construction contributes over a third of the UK's total yearly waste amount. Waste comes in a variety of forms, from excavated materials to incorrectly ordered materials and packaging. The traditional approach adopted in construction is the so-called linear model, where raw materials are converted into waste. Typically, this involves existing buildings stripped to their shell and demolished, whilst a new replacement structure on the existing footprint is fitted out with fresh materials. This model, it is argued, fails to recognise the fact that the supply of raw materials is finite. One of the solutions, and it's being adopted by other sectors, to reduce emissions and waste that has been put forward is to adopt a circular model. This seeks to eliminate waste production at all stages of the build process, from procurement and design, through construction and into operation, and then eventually end-of-life destinations. In addition, circular construction seeks to reduce the demand for single-use materials by keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible, and using recovered materials. A circular model utilises deconstruction, or the selective dismantling, and differs from demolition, where a site is cleared of its building by the most expedient means, i.e. a wrecking ball. However, deconstruction does require more labour. Material recycling, which is self-explanatory, and modular construction systems, built in a way that makes partial deconstruction possible, although it has to be said that the modular construction sector in the UK has experienced very hard times recently. Turning to reusing existing materials, which involves reusing bricks, timber and steelwork, there are two main approaches: recycled and reclaimed. So, what's the difference? Recycled materials are any materials that have been taken from the waste stream and reprocessed and remanufactured to form a new product at no extra cost. For example, dense blockwork, concrete roofing tiles, and glass and mineral wool insulation. On the other hand, reclaimed materials are any materials that have been used either in buildings or temporary works or other uses and are reused as construction materials without reprocessing. Reclaimed materials may be adapted and cut to size, cleaned up and refinished, but they are fundamentally being reused in their original form, for example, timber flooring, bricks and steelwork. The problem is that currently, much of the reclamation industry is set up to meet the needs of small to medium-sized builders. For larger projects, there is no established supply chain that can reliably supply builders with large quantities of reclaimed materials. Therefore, to undertake signature projects requiring large quantities of reclaimed materials inevitably results in long lead-ins and perhaps the establishment of storage for reclaimed materials as they become available. And finally, renewable construction materials could be considered, ranging from very natural, unprocessed materials such as straw bales used for walling, to more refined projects such as floor coverings manufactured from renewable polymers. Renewable materials are beginning to be introduced into mainstream construction, for example, hemp and lime walling materials, and it is claimed they may soon become commonplace in UK building. However, many renewable construction materials are still at the development stage and are not yet widely available for most applications. For these reasons, information on costs associated with renewable materials are not widely available. Not unsurprisingly, it is the Scandinavian countries that appear to be leading the way towards a circular approach. For example, the Dutch authority mandates material passports for all new public buildings and require that 30% of materials in infrastructure projects should be circular by 2026. For those who are unfamiliar with the term material passport, it consists of a data-rich passport for the components of each building or piece of infrastructure. The passport contains all the information and data relating to the materials, for example, its origin, composition, and full specification, even including the way it has been constructed, assembled, or even applied. Even France has new legislation requiring all public building construction to be at least 20% of reused materials by 2030. A recent survey by the BSI indicated that in the UK, 64% of people surveyed had either no or very little knowledge of the circular approach. Call me a cynic, but until construction perceives there is a buck in adopting the circular model, or it is forced to, it won't happen. And now, moving on to alliancing. It's just partnering, isn't it? Construction is thought by some to be unique, citing a proliferation of small firms forming temporary alliances with little common vision and leadership, the separation of design and construction, and uncertainty due to variable demand and fierce competition for work, which creates low levels of commercial profitability. Few construction projects commence with any conscious intent to develop adversarial relationships. However, relationships can frequently become adversarial because of the bilateral nature of many contract structures and the absence of equitable risk-sharing arrangements. Clients, contractors, and specialists use the contractual machinery available to them to protect their commercial interests. A significant majority of UK construction clients regard it as being in their best interests to pass risk down to their professional advisors and the Tier 1 contractors. The Tier 1 contractors then feel it necessary to further pass the risk to their subcontractors and specialists. Consequently, when challenges or problems arise in traditional contractual structures, there is little incentive for the parties to collaborate to resolve them. Escalating costs, tight fiscal constraints, and supply chain disruption are rendering the delivery of major programs harder than ever. Look at HS2, for example. Could collaborative alliancing be the answer? But alliancing is just partnering, isn't it? Confusion often arises between partnering and alliancing. Partnering was introduced into construction post-Latham, around the mid-1990s, and at the time was hailed as the silver bullet to promote greater collaboration in construction. Since then, enthusiasm for partnering has declined and is now used on less than 5% of construction procurement. While partnering enjoyed some success following its introduction, it fell largely into disrepute when the misalignment between the contractual framework being used and the behaviour required for success became apparent. Alliancing, on the other hand, has been in the headline recently as an important tool for delivering the government's new infrastructure plans. Successive governments have been calling, through a long list of publications and reports, for UK construction to adopt a less adversarial approach to contracting by engaging in early supply chain involvement, selection by value and consideration of whole life costs, common processes and tools such as BIM, performance measurement using KPIs, long-term relationships, partnering, note my earlier comments, and aligned commercial arrangements, alliancing. Alliancing and partnering do have similarities, but they also have very important differences. The principle is basically the same. We all pull together in the same direction in an attempt to increase profit, improve performance and client satisfaction, as well as reducing disputes and delays. Sounds good, eh? The important distinction between partnering and alliancing is that with partnering, the aims and goals are agreed and dispute resolution and escalation plans are established, but the partners still retain their independence and may individually suffer financial pain or gain from the relationship. If a partner decides to leave the framework or becomes insolvent, then a replacement is simply appointed and slotted in. However, in an alliance, the parties form a cohesive entity that jointly shares all risks and reward based on an agreed formula. Consequently, if the project fails to meet pre-agreed performance criteria, then all the parties jointly share the agreed penalty. Alternatively, if the project exceeds stated performance criteria, all parties share the rewards. Proponents claim this creates a true win-win, lose-lose environment, which is the primary driver of behaviour in an alliance. So the moral has to be, when joining an alliance, choose your bedfellows carefully. And finally, a couple of PSs. Sorry to see H.E. Sim & Son, a family-run business founded in 1948, file for insolvency. And goodbye Big Ange, hello Steve Reed. Like or loathe Big Ange, she appeared to have an evangelical zeal for planning law revision and house building, and importantly, had influence at the top table. We wait and see whether Steve Reed will be able to keep the house building momentum going, such as it is. In a recent interview, he promised to, and get this, unleash one of the biggest eras of building in our country's history. We'll hold you to that, Steve. Well, that's all for this episode. I hope that you found it interesting. Thank you for listening to the end. Barney and me truly admire your stamina. This has been a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. Barney and I would really appreciate it if you were to spread the word, subscribe, and, if you've got the time, write a review. Until next time, take care.